Welcome again to the third and final webinar in this series. Fabrice, I'm in charge of the Centreon user community. This webinar will be presented by Laurent Pensivi, product manager at Centreon. As a reminder, you can leave your questions in the chat. They will be answered at the end of this presentation. Let's go, Laurent. We're in chat now.
Thank you, Fabrice. Hi, everybody. Today we will discuss about authentication and authorization in Centreon. So let's start with a quick definition. So authentication is to be sure for an application, that's a good person access to the application. So basically you use a login and password, but you can also use your fingerprint or biometric recognition. And to searching authentication on your application, you can use several factors, and this is called a multi-factor authentication or MFA. Once you're authenticated to the application needs to be sure that you have access to the application. Then, if you have access to the application will link to your self profile that determine which kind of authorization you have in this application. For example, on which menu you can access, visibility of resources, or which action you can perform into the application. So let's start with authentication. So in Centreon, we have 4 available methods. First one is local authentication. Then you can use an LDAP server to authenticate your users. You can also use WebSSO or OpenID Connect protocol. So for local authentication, so it's very simple. You access to the login page, you set your login, you set your password, you click on connect. Then Centreon will check your login and your password with credentials stored into the DBMS. And if everything is okay, you are connected to Centreon UI. Since the 22.04 version, we include a password security policy into Centreon. So if you install a new Centreon server or if you upgrade your server to the latest version, and you will have this password security policy enabled by default, and you can disable it. This policy allows you to define the length, the minimal length of the password and the letter cases. So if a user wants to define a new password, you need to respect the specification. To be sure that the password will not be the same for the next 5 years, we have a password expiration policy. So you define after how many months the user needs to change his password. To be sure that you will not set the previous one, you can enable the last 3 passwords can be reused. And to be sure that you will not use the same page to redefine password, and you can set a couple of days or hours between 2 change of password. And of course, for accounts used to administrate your platform, for example, Centreon Gorgon, Centreon BI, Centreon Map, or other accounts you use to access to API, you have the possibility to exclude these users from a password expiration policy. So if your password is over, you access to a new page, you have to set your current password, your new password to reset your password. And 7 days before the end of your password, you will have in the banner an information that explains you that your password will expire in X days. In this policy, you have also a system to block brute force attack. So you can define after how many false authentication, false password, you block a user for X minutes or X hour or X days. So if you 5 times you put an incorrect password, the user will be blocked. And this works for Centreon UI or for API access. Let's continue with LDAP authentication. So it looks like the same. You access to Centreon login page, you set your login, your password, but Centreon will ask to the LDAP server if credentials are okay. And if credentials are okay, you are connected to the Centreon UI. In Centreon, you have to, of course, configure LDAP authentication. You have the possibility to import automatically new users, or you have the possibility to select user manually. You have to define a contact template, so a new user added into Centreon will use this contact template. It's useful for notification. And you have you can select a default contact group that will allow, we will see later, for when you user are logging into Centreon to have a default Centreon profile. You have the possibility to enable synchronization on login, so to get the list of groups of your users, or if you have several groups or several forests, maybe you have to disable this synchronization on login and use a cron to make synchronization after. You can define several LDAP servers, and you can define several forests. So if you have 2 or 3 forests, you have to declare all your LDAP servers. And when Centreon will try to find a new user, of course, you will ask the first LDAP server, and if you can't find the user, we'll ask the second one, and it depends on all servers you declare into Centreon. And to perform the LDAP configuration, of course, you have to define which user can browse the forest on your LDAP servers. You have to define the protocol. Then you have to define base DM to search user groups and all attributes from your LDAP server configuration to export them into Centreon for the login, for the groups, for the given name, for the email address. Okay, let's continue with WebSSO. So WebSSO is different. You have to make a configuration into your web server here, Apache. So you have to configure Apache to ask authentication to a third party. So in this example, it's OpenID Connect. So when the user tries to access to Centreon, Apache will check if the user is already logged on your identity provider. If not, Apache will forward the user to the identity provider. Regarding your configuration, you will set login password or multi-factor authentication. Then the identity provider forward the users to Apache, and Apache will forward the user to the Centreon UI interface. And Centreon will get the login from Apache configuration, and if the user exists, the user will be logged into Centreon UI. So you have to configure first Apache, and you have to configure Centreon to know which variable from headers we have to use to get the login. And you have also the possibility to add a trust list of IP addresses or blacklist if you want to perform like a firewall configuration. Then the last available protocol is OpenID Connect. So the user try to access to Centreon. He will click on Connect with OpenID Connect. Centreon will forward the user to the identity provider. The user will connect on the identity provider page. Then the identity provider will forward the user to Centreon. And Centreon will extract from information the login to log the user into the UI. And for this, you have to configure into Centreon all parameters about OpenID Connect authentication, so the path URL, the authorization endpoint, token endpoint, of course, client ID, client secret, for Centreon to authenticate itself to the identity provider. You have to define one or several scope. You have to declare which variable from the flow we have to use to extract the login. And you have to define the endpoint to extract information of the user. Then, like for web SSO, you can declare trust client addresses or blacklist client addresses. So to summarize, in Centreon, you have 4 possibilities to authenticate your users. Use local account, LDAP server, web SSO configuration, or OpenID Connect authentication. Let's continue with authorization. Once a user access to the Centreon web interface, a profile will be applied. What is a profile? It's access to menus, it's access to resources and action available on resources. So into Centreon, you have to define a group of access control lists and define several menu accesses, resource accesses, action accesses. And a user can be part of several ACL groups. And this will be the sum of all ACL groups will be the Centreon profile of the user. So let's see how to configure this. First, so you have to configure an ACL group. So you have a dedicated menu into administration ACL. So you set a group, and you can link contact or contact groups. If you use LDAP in the list of contact groups, you will see all available LDAP groups. And this will allow for LDAP user to automatically be linked to the correct ACL group. Okay. So let's see menu access configuration. So in the same administration ACL, you will define a menu access. So you define a name, you select which ACL group you link this menu access, and you will define a menu by menu authorization for this menu access. So you have to check level 1 menu, sub-level 2 menu, and sub-level 3 menu, it exists. And don't forget, if you want that user access to a sub-level 3 menu, that's level 1 and level 2 cases are checked. If not, the users can't access to this menu. Now let's see resources access. So you create a new resources access. Of course, you will link this resources access to an ACL group. And you will have a, okay, sorry. And you will have several tabs to select which kind of resource you can access. So you can select all by host or check the box, include all hosts. If you create host group, you can select group by group or check the box, include all host group. You have the possibility to select services by services, service group by service group or all service group. if you used to create meta services, you can link meta services, and you have the possibility to filter by a poller or by a category of host or category of service. Filter, it means if you select the Windows host group and, for example, the France host category, it means the user will see only resource part of Windows host group and Canada host group filter. So to summarize user access, user resources access, it means resources which will be visible must be part of included resources, part of included pollers or category if you select them. So be sure that you make a correct configuration. It will be hard, but this schema represents in the center that resources will be available for a user. Then the last one is action access. So action access is the possibility for a user to visualize the tab counters, possibility to generate configuration, or in the real-time pages, possibility to add a cancel at downtime, add cancel acknowledgement, add remove a comment, reschedule a next check. Or in fact, all action you can perform on resources. So to do this is the same. You have to create action access. So you define a name, select the ASL group, and then you check action that your users can access. So for services, you can add access to check a service, to acknowledge a service or disacknowledge a service. So you have several options, and you have to define for this ASL group which actions which will be available for your users. So as explained you, a user can be part of several ASL groups. So when your user will connect to Centreon, Centreon will make the sum of all menus, all resources, and all action that the user can access. So if you have some question, do not hesitate.
Yes. Thank you, Laurent, for this presentation. There is, I have some questions for you. First question, can we use local LDAP and OpenID authentication in parallel?
Of course, you can use local authentication and LDAP authentication because user imported from an LDAP server are linked into the database with this LDAP server. So when you define on the login page a login and password, Centreon will check if the user exists from who, from local, from LDAP, and if the user does not exist, and if LDAP configuration is enabled with auto import of user enabled, Centreon will contact LDAP server. So yes, you can use both at the same time. For OpenID Connect, it's different. In fact, that is not different. If you enable OpenID authentication on the login page, you will have two buttons. The first one to connect with LDAP or local authentication, and the second one is a button named Connect with OpenID. And when you click on this button, you will be forwarded. Your browser will forward you to the identity provider to set your credentials. So yes, you can use this in parallel. But if you use WebSSO, you can't use other method because Apache. Because Apache will check before you access to Centreon if you have a valid authentication. So if you want to use local, LDAP, and OpenID, you can use the three in parallel. But if you use WebSSO, you can't.
Thank you, Laurent. Arnaud, I hope this responds to your question. I have another question. Question is bit bit long. Can we reach the API through OEDC key clock, for example?
Can you access to how will you access to the API? In fact, if you want to access to the API, it looks like the same if you want to access to the Centreon user interface. So if you enable local LDAP, you will use your credential to access to the API. If you want to use OpenID Connect to authenticate your users through the web interface, you have to create local accounts to use APIs. With OpenID Connect, you can't use the APIs. The authentication method is based on LDAP or local. And if you use WebSSO, you can't access to the API because Apache will block you before.
Okay, so for it's the same person. He's asking, can the ACL be synced with OEDC? OIDC.
We are developing currently those authorizations. So yes, in fact, in few weeks, with OpenID Connect, you will have the possibility to automatically import new user, and you will have the possibility to link from definition of groups from your identity provider to link these groups with a cell group definition, like for LDAP, for example.
Okay, I think Corentin, you have a lot to say. If you wish, I can. If doesn't bother you, Laurent, I can open Corentin microphone. If he wish, he can chat with you directly. He has a lot of things to say, and I don't know if by reading his question, it will help. Sinon, enfin, he has if not, he has another question. Is in the previous version, LDAP had to be configured and users imported before being able
Yes,
to use
no.
Keycloak.
Okay, I
Is it
understand.
still the case?
In the previous version, because we didn't develop auto import of user from identity provider, it was possible to use LDAP server to import new users and to apply authorization. Now, because we are developing this system for OpenID Connect, it's not possible to use both LDAP and OpenID Connect. If you use OpenID Connect, these users will be imported from OpenID Connect definition and from a list of groups from OpenID Connect.
Okay.
There is no more mix between both.
Okay, last question from Corentin. In the ACL, previously, the groups synced from a LDAP were sticky, remaining in Centreon even if deleted in the LDAP, and had to be manually removed from the database. Is it still the case?
Okay. I didn't know that we used to have this issue. For this version, we don't apply, we don't make changes on LDAP protocol. So if this bug were present, maybe it's still present. So okay, maybe we can see this later and try to find a fix for this.
Okay, thank you, Laurent. Another question from Arnaud. What are the minimum rights for the service principal for Azure?
We need credential to read the forest and to read the parameter that you to define. So we need to access to semi-code name, given name, email address. So we or groups and the list of users. So if you define user DN and group DN, the user that you define to Centreon need to access to this organization, this OU.
Okay, thank you, Laurent. This is not a question, it's from Stefan. That said, we don't make changes to the LDAP code no more.
Yes, it was not in this roadmap for this version. Yes, we know in the future we have to move the LDAP configuration to the new Centreon authentication menu and to make a refactor. So that yes, we know that we have to work on this and to improve this part.
Okay, thank you, Laurent. Thank you again. Do you have any other questions? Oh, don't know. We still have some few minutes. If you don't have any other question, we can wait some seconds. Check. No, if you, I think there is a question. No, thanks, I know. Okay, but if you don't have questions, we at the end of this webinar. I hope that these 3 webinars have helped you to better understand these features. Thank you all for attending. Replace will be the true webinar replace will be sent to your email addresses. Stay tuned to the watch so don't miss anything, and have a good day, good evening, good night, depending on where you are. Thank you, everybody. Bye. Thank you, Laurent. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.